come to you. Again, ITU has been around for years and years and years and years, one of the oldest entities of the United Nations. It's got governance, processes, 7 years to get its standards through. I mean, in this day of the internet and fast-changing technology, is this process of governance that is followed at ITU, one, relevant, unsustainable?
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that provoking question. I know that the slowness of ITU was a regular complaint, but that was, I think, some time back, because the processes in ITU were reformed some years ago to give, ITU is a UN agency, so only member states can vote, unlike in ETSI where the companies vote. So we can't have our companies voting. But what we did was to get around that to some extent, because in our study groups we have a process where it works by consensus. And consensus doesn't mean unanimity. So it's the chairman decides if there's consensus or not. And it could be that there were some players don't like the consensus, but nevertheless, the chairman rules as consensus is consensus. It then goes on to the ITU website for the member states to comment. And of course, nowadays, most member states don't get into the technical standards area. So very often there's no comments. And when it's after 4 weeks, just 4 weeks, it's been approved. And the advantage, of course, of having it approved as an ITU standard is you've got 193 governments approving it. So I would say it's a very nice public-private partnership, because companies can come to ITU, they can propose a standard, they can drive the work to get a standard, and through consensus, and then the member states endorse it, and it becomes an international standard. And it's very important that we have international standards. I mean, that's why ITU was created in 1865, and India's been a member for over 150 years, by the way.
Okay.
It was created because of the need for interoperability and cross-border interconnection with the telegraph service. So the basic remit for ITU has remained right through to this day, because only if you have international standards can you ensure interoperability, that you travel from one country to another, you can still use your device. It improves efficiencies, spectrum efficiency, if you've got a harmonized spectrum, and it brings down the costs, through economies of scale. So there's a very, very strong case for international standards. Of course, ITU is no longer the only body doing it. We have about estimated 500 standards bodies around the world, but it's the only intergovernmental body that adopts standards. So it does have an important role to play. And we need to work in collaboration with all the various standards bodies. 3GPP and ITU have had a process where we work together going back to 2000, I think it was, when we agreed it. And now, when I was the standards director in ITU, I pushed what we call the Bridging the Standards gap. Because it's very important that the developing countries have a role in the development of standards, because the requirements for standards in developing countries is different to us in the developed countries. It used to be that it was only the developing countries driving the work, but now that we have more leadership positions in our standards sector in ITU from people from developing countries than from developed. We have a very active participation from developing countries. And this is why I was very, very keen for India to establish a standards body, to coordinate all the Indian input into ITU. And as you know, India has got a very important proposal on the radio interface for 5G. what was mentioned, low mobility large cell.
Large cell, yeah, LMLC we refer to.
Yeah, I was never sure whether it's large cell, low mobility.